Fish mummy. Wait, what? Why would you need a fish mummy? To feed your mummy cat, of course. Don't you know that in ancient Egypt they loved their pets so much that they liked to mummify and get buried with them when they died? A couple was found with their whole zoo. They had dogs, cats, baboons, and green monkeys. You think this was some kind of rare occurrence? Think again. They had a whole bazaar for mummified animals. You need a better harvest next year? Why don't you go down to the shop and buy a mummy scarab that you can sacrifice to the gods? Congratulations! Now your fields will be full of crops. But be careful, it was so popular that they also had fraudsters at the bazaar. Some of them tried to sell you wraps filled with junk. If you're lucky, there might be some animal remains from their dinner last night, but don't count on it. Some poor people thought that was good enough though. If you ask me, the gods would not be happy with you if you do that. The unlucky animals at the bazaar got killed in their prime just to be mummified and sold to you. But did you know, some of them actually lived like pharaohs and were considered sacred. For example, the Apis bull. Priests would travel all around looking for such an animal, which if you ask me is such a good excuse to travel around, all expenses covered. After finding such an animal, they would take special care of it, giving it everything it could need until its natural death. Only then they could be mummified and buried in a special ceremony. Not all Egyptians believe in that though, some just wanted to get a snack for the afterlife. In that case, the animals would be specially prepared, feathers plucked, skin removed, cut into neat pieces, wrapped in cloth and put into small coffins. Some would even mummify fish for their dead cats, talking about wasting a large amount of gold. Some of the strangest animals found buried were the likes of crocodiles, lions, cobras, bulls and gazelles. Of course, not all mummies were from ancient Egypt. In fact, the best preserved mummy ever found was from China. In 1971, when workers were digging near an air raid shelter, they stumbled across a whole family's massive tomb. Inside, nearly 12 meters underground, in a place packed with moisture-absorbing charcoal, a thick layer of paste-like soil, and sealed with clay, 4 coffins were located, each resting within the other. Pop them open one after the other, and what will you find inside? Shin Jui, wrapped inside 20 layers of silk and 80 liters of unknown fluid. Skin like a living person, still soft to the touch. Some of her joints could move. She still had her full hair, eyebrows and lashes. Even the hair in her nostril was intact. Another surprise when they opened her was that all her organs were intact. She even still had blood in her veins. You might be wondering where she got the money for such a burial. She was the wife of high-ranking Han official Li Shang, the Marquis of Dai. He and her son were also in the tomb, but they did not get preserved as well. They must have been living quite the life, because more than 3,000 artifacts were buried with them. Shin Jui was living the life. She had everything a woman in ancient China could want. Of course, too much of a good thing is never a good thing. She died at the young age of 50 because of her lifetime of obesity, lack of exercise and overindulgent diet. She was suffering from gallstones, high cholesterol, high blood pressure and a liver disease. Ouch, imagine being roasted for your health 2000 years after your death. Not only that, blood clots were found in her veins, which led scientists to believe that she died of a heart attack shortly after her last meal. How did we know what her last meal was? She had 138 undigested melon seeds in her stomach. At least she went out her own way with a dessert. In 1999, a team of archaeologists led by John Reinhardt spent 3 days walking in the snow, facing winds of up to 112 km per hour at one of the world's highest sites. At an altitude of 6,700 meters, near the peak of Mount Yuyayaco, in present-day Argentina, they discovered a burial platform which lay under 1.5 meters of rock and earth. At one point, the team had to lower one of the workers in the pit by his ankle so he could pull out the mummy out with his hands. They had just discovered the children of Yuyayaco, a 13-year-old girl and 2 young children, a boy and a girl. Age, depending on the source, either 4 to 5 or 6 to 7 years old. Like numerous other mummies, they were freeze-dried by nature, rather than deliberately mummified by fellow humans. Nevertheless, they are remarkably preserved. You may ask yourself, why were they buried there? As part of an Inca Kappa culture ceremony that involved the sacrifice of children along with various ceremonial objects. They would take the children from conquered peripheral provinces and move them into the capital city of Cusco. They got literally transformed there for a year and then moved to various sacred places through the empire to be sacrificed. Children could be sacrificed quite often in the Inca Empire. For example, when a new Inca ruler assumed the throne, up to 200 children could be sacrificed. Other occasions include everything from the birth of an heir, funeral of royals, in response to natural disasters such as droughts, finishing a big construction project, and for fertility and health. Looks like any occasion could be a good occasion for some children's sacrifices. Archaeologists analyzed samples from the children and revealed that all 3 of them had consistently consumed coca leaves. Not exactly what you imagine is used today, but good enough for a great party back then. Also a good amount of alcohol. The oldest child, named the maiden, ingested noticeably more of both, with consumption peaking within the last 2 weeks of her life. It's not clear how she died, but she might have frozen to death and was likely placed in her final position while she was still alive or shortly after her death. In all likelihood, she died peacefully, which unfortunately could not be said for the young boy. He had blood on his cloak, and a cloth binding around his body suggested he might have died from suffocation. On May 13, 1983, in a pit mill near Limslow, Andy Mote and Stephen Dolly were watching the conveyor belt for anything strange that could clog the machine. They spotted something that reminded them of a black leather soccer ball. They joked it might even be a dinosaur wreck. Imagine that! But what they found was even better, a human skull. The jaw was missing, but there was still some skin on it. A strange yellowish substance was oozing from the skull, which later turned out to be part of the brain. Oh yeah, and did I mention that the eyeball was still intact in the socket? They instantly called the police. A forensic team conducted an examination and reported that the skull was that of a woman between 13 and 50 years old. They instantly had a local suspect. It turns out they had been digging near the Window Moss Bog at the house of a man suspected of murdering his wife. The man was Rain Bart, an airline employee who had a wild ride of a relationship with Malika Maria de Fernandez in 1959. It took him mere hours after first meeting her to propose. 4 days later, they were already married. You can imagine how long that lasted. Only a few months later, they divorced, but Fernandez kept using her ex-husband's discount to fly on multiple vacations. Rain Bart moved on quickly and started living with another man, but around 1960 or 1961, Fernandez returned to demand money from him, or she would expose his sexuality to the police. Being gay was still illegal in England until 1967. He had no money to offer her, and based on his confession, and I'm quoting, "Something just boiled over inside me." He then grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her to death. After that, he used an axe to chop her up and tried to burn the remains, but that did not work, so he tossed the remains in the bog. Rain was easy to find. He had recently been released from jail for unrelated crimes. You might wonder, why did I tell you all of that in the Mummy video? Imagine his surprise when it turned out that the skull was around 17th century old, dating all the way back to the Roman Britain. The skull was part of a bog mummy, one of many found there and also all around Northern Europe. If you have a bog near you, have a look around, you never know what you might find.